Well, to those who wouldn't agree with that, the discussion here is not just fraud at one ballot box. It's not just one fraud at a station or a city. It's fraud across the country.
But we reject that claim. This is not true. The Guardian's Council, prior to the election day, has had close and precise monitoring of the electoral process, and on the election day, on June 12th, the supervisors and inspectors were present, and there has been no major irregularity or fraud that may affect the election results, and I can strongly tell you that there has been no frauds in the course of the elections.
Let's move on. Something possibly related, and an issue that has come up a number of times, in terms of vote counting and announcing the results of the vote. What are the most important differences that there's been between this election, the 10th presidential election, and the elections that we've had before that, and that you've looked over in Iran before that, in terms of rules, procedures, vote counting and announcing?
There has been no major difference with the previous elections, but from the view of monitoring the electoral process, we tried to come up with new measures and actions in order to become more certain about the healthy electoral process. For example, regarding the ballot papers, we have considered two seals, the seal for supervision and monitoring, and also the electoral seal. Or speaking of the ballot papers, every ballot paper has a special code and a serial number for every province. In addition to this, we have also had experience, we dispatched experienced inspectors to the provinces in order to have more close monitoring of the implementation of the electoral process. And these were the mechanisms and methods that we applied in order to have more trust and confidence in the election results, in order to create further trust among the candidates and their supporters.
But yet there has been complaints, and let's touch upon that. There have been many complaints, we've heard of them, we've seen some, by all three candidates that were running, apart from Mr. Ahmadinejad. How would you categorise these complaints that you've gotten in simple terms for our viewers to understand what the main issues have been?
As I told you earlier, basically the election is considered as a major project, and in fact the whole country gets involved in the electoral process. And in fact, since this is something done, a process carried out by a human being and by human beings, and therefore that is similar to other elections in other countries. Now, speaking of the elections in the U.S., I can refer to the presidential elections when George W. Bush and Al Gore were running for the presidency in the U.S. So this is a process carried out by humans, and there may be some errors. But what matters is that how should we deal with those errors? There has been incoming reports in connection with some minor irregularities, and of course the inspectors did deal with some of these irregularities on the election day, and some others was referred to the judiciary, but none of these have led to a change in the election results. In fact, we at the Guardian Council look into those irregularities that can affect the election results, and so far we have had no such irregularity.
I'd like to look at some of the specific allegations, though, and then get your response to them, because there has been some. First of all, that in 70 polling stations, the turnout was about 140%.
Of course, it's not 70 polling stations. There have been various claims, and in fact, the number of polling stations you mentioned are much less than what you said. There are some reasons for that. From the legal point of view, there's nothing wrong with the number of turnout to be above the number of eligible voters, particularly with respect to the presidential elections. You can cast your vote here in Tehran or in Shiraz or in Isfahan. That does not make any difference from the view of the legal system. The second point is that in many of the areas mentioned, these are places that are used by the people for spending their vacation time, to have their vacation time, and in fact people traveled to these areas at the time of the weekends, like Chenaran, Torqabe in Mashhad, and also northern parts of Tehran. And you see the population that are present there on Thursday and Friday. A great deal of people who travel to these areas at the time of weekends. There are also areas where there are many migrant laborers and students who travel to these areas. Now, based on the statistics we have received from some polling stations, these are new stations, and we do not have the accurate figures related to the number of eligible voters, and we cannot firmly claim that the turnout has been over 100%. So there were some minor cases, and in fact, this is something that can be justified. Similar cases may have occurred in previous elections. If it becomes clear that this turnout has led to certain irregularities, that has to be dealt with, and there has been no such irregularity.
Mr. Mousavi claims that there's been thousands of reports of irregularities, but yet Guardian Council has said it's only received 227.
Well, speaking of irregularities, every individual may make certain claims. Mr. Mousavi sent some minor cases after the elections, and in fact, these were in connection with the executive process of the elections. For example, it was said that there has been some campaigns going on at a certain polling station. We did look into the case, and some of them were not true. And in fact, in some cases, we did take up the necessary actions. Or there has been report that the representative of the candidate has been expelled from the polling station. We looked into the case, and we came up to the conclusion that there has not been such a case, and the representative was not basically present in that particular polling station. So most of these cases are minor cases, and we have taken up the necessary actions if the claims were proved to be true, and if not, we will inform the candidates about relevant reports.
Why were 57 million ballot papers produced when there's only around 46 million eligible voters in Iran?
Basically, for every election, since the number of eligible voters is not a precise figure, the number of ballot papers that are published are more than what has been foreseen. In fact, the number of ballot papers was 58 million, and in fact there were 2 million more ballot papers, and in fact we also asked some of our inspectors to go to the Interior Ministry and look into the contracts for the publication of the ballot papers, the number of papers that have been left at the warehouses, and also the number of ballot papers that have been sent to the polling stations. So we have collected all the necessary information, and the report has been submitted to the Guardians Council. Fortunately, there has been no problem with respect to the publication of the ballot papers, and the ballot papers were sufficient for the polling stations, and those that have been distributed were used. And in fact, the number of ballot papers used and the remaining ballot papers have all been actually monitored by the Guardians Council, the security forces, and the Interior Ministry. They have been sealed, and in fact, they are all present, and we have all the figures related to these ballot papers.
Well, one criticism of that was given on polling day and has been talked about afterwards in terms of this allegation of